Warning, I chain smoke and I say fuck a lot. But I accept myself for the way I am. I accept you too. Viewer discretion advised.
Well, I got strike number 2, and I can't upload for 2 weeks on my main channel. So I'm hanging by a thread right now. So I'm going to upload here and other places like Rockfin and wherever else until it comes back. If it does. A few months ago, I made a video called Trust Fauci about all the HIV patients and AIDS patients, saying that Fauci was pretty much killing them with AZT. And another video I made was called A Nobel about Gary Mullis, PCR inventor, who I think most of us are familiar with by now, and things that he had to say about Fauci in the 90s. So I already knew about all that, but I didn't know about Fauci's foster kids. From Just the News, July 23, 2020. Earlier this month, Dr. Anthony Fauci offered a pointed response to those who have challenged his stewardship of the pandemic as the nation's infectious disease chief. Quote, "I think you can trust me," he declared, citing his long record of service in government medicine. That is exactly what Fauci's National Institute of Allergies and Infectious Diseases, NIAID, agency declared years ago to foster children in New York, Illinois, and elsewhere, many of whom were enrolled in an AIDS drug trial without the promised patient protections. An investigation concluded the NIAID's AIDS Research Division that reported to Fauci had failed in many cases to provide patient advocates to monitor the foster kids' health, as promised.
The city of New York had been forcing HIV-positive children under its supervision to be used as human guinea pigs in tests for experimental AIDS drug trials. All the children in the program were under the legal guidance of the city's Child Welfare Department, known as the Administration for Children's Services, or ACS. Most lived in foster care or independent homes run on behalf of the local authorities, and almost all the children were believed to be African American or Latino.
ACS grossly misled us in terms of the numbers of children that were participating in these experiments. They originally said only 76. Last week they informed me that they were over 465 and could not even indicate as to whether that number was going to grow even larger.
AIDS drugs tested on foster kids, May 4, 2005. Government-funded researchers tested AIDS drugs on hundreds of foster children over the past 2 decades, often without providing them a basic protection afforded in federal law and required by some states. The research funded by the National Institutes of Health spanned the country. It was most widespread in the 1990s as foster care agencies sought treatments for their HIV-infected children that weren't yet available in the marketplace. The practice ensured that foster children, mostly poor or minority, received care from world-class researchers at government expense, slowing their rate of death and extending their lives. But it also exposed the vulnerable population to the risk of medical research and drugs that were known to have serious side effects in adults, and for which the safety for children was unknown.
These children, according to the ACS guidelines, did not so much as have the dignity of individual consent on their behalf. They were herded like animals. Some of the trials, some of the protocols say that the children are, and I quote, presumed to be HIV positive. Now, what kind of society are we that children who are only presumed, and by whom are they presumed? What criteria makes them presumed to be HIV, that those children then get exposed to as many as 7 highly toxic experimental drugs. These children were not in treatment, and ACS can't fudge that. Research and treatment are 2 very different things.
The research was conducted in at least 7 states: Illinois, Louisiana, Maryland, New York, North Carolina, Colorado, and Texas, and involved more than 4 dozen different studies. The foster children ranged from infants to late teens, according to interviews in government records. Several studies that enlisted foster children reported patients suffered side effects such as rashes, vomiting, and sharp drops in infection-fighting blood cells as they tested antiretroviral drugs to suppress AIDS or other medicines to treat secondary infections. In one study, researchers reported a, quote, disturbing higher death rate among children who took higher doses of a drug. That study was unable to determine a safe and effective dose.
All of those sort of things are not to be decided by bureaucrats who want to expedite simply the enrollment of children and couldn't care less as to what kind of experiments. I think it's very important to note that when ACS on their official documents refers to these as minimal risk, that's nonsense. These were phase 1 and phase 2 trials, which are the most experimental.
The government provided special protections for child boards in 1983. They required researchers and their oversight boards to appoint independent advocates for any foster child enrolled in a narrow class of studies that involved greater than minimal risk and lacked the promise of direct benefit. Some foster agencies required the protection regardless of risks and benefits. Advocates must be independent of foster care and research agencies, have some understanding of medical issues, and, quote, act in the best interest of the child. For the entirety of the research, the law states. However, foster children in AIDS drug trials often weren't given such advocates, even though research institutions many times promised to do so to gain access to the children.
They had the children ready to go into trials before anyone even approved the specific protocol. There is a very unseemly way in which these children were dealt. Their dignity, their humanity was just stripped. They were treated as numbers.
How old were the
They
kids?
were from 3 months old on.
Illinois officials believe none of their nearly 200 foster children in AIDS studies got independent monitors, even though researchers signed a document guaranteeing, quote, the appointment of an advocate for each individual ward participating in the respective medical research. New York City could find records showing 142, less than a third, of the 465 foster children in AIDS drug trials got such monitors, even though city policy required them. Likewise, research facilities including Chicago's Children's Memorial Hospital and Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore said they concluded they didn't provide advocates for foster kids. Some foster children died during studies, but state or city agencies said they could find no records that any deaths were directly caused by experimental treatments. Of course they couldn't. Many of the studies that enrolled foster children occurred after 1990, when the government approved using the drug AZT for children. Arthur Kaplan, head of medical ethics at the University of Pennsylvania, said advocates should have been appointed for all foster children because researchers felt the pressure of a medical crisis and knew there was great uncertainty as to how children would react to AIDS medications that were often toxic for adults. Quote, it is exactly that set of circumstances that made it absolutely mandatory to get those kids those advocates, Kaplan said. Quote, it is inexcusable that they wouldn't have any advocate for each one of those children. When you have the most vulnerable subjects imaginable, kids without parents, you really do have to come in with someone independent who doesn't have a dog in this fight, he said. Quote, I understand the ethical dilemma surrounding the introduction of foster children into trials, said Dr. Mark Klein, a pediatric AIDS expert at Baylor College of Medicine. He enrolled some Texas foster kids in his studies, and he doesn't recall appointing advocates for them. AP's review found that if children were old enough, usually between 5 and 10, they also were educated about the risks and asked to consent. Sometimes foster parents or biological parents were consulted, other times not. Researchers reported some children had to be taken off the drug because of, quote, serious toxicity. Others developed rashes, and the rates of death and blood toxicity were significantly higher in children who took the medicine daily rather than weekly. At least 10 children died from a variety of causes, including 4 from blood poisoning, and researchers said they were unable to determine a safe, useful dosage. They said the deaths didn't appear to be, quote, directly attributable to dapsone, which I guess is one of the drugs, but nonetheless they were, quote, disturbing. Quote, an unexpected finding in our study was that overall mortality while receiving the study drug was significantly higher in the daily dapsone group. This finding remains unexplained. Another study involving foster children in the 1990s treated children with difficult combinations of adult antiretroviral drugs. Among 52 children, there were 26 moderate to severe reactions, nearly all in infants. The side effects included rash, fever, and major drop in infection-fighting white blood cells. Research and foster agencies declined to make foster parents or children in the drug trials available for interviews, or to provide information about individual drug doses, side effects, or deaths, citing medical privacy laws.
There seems to be some, quote, cover-up type activity that's taking place that needs to be looked into.
Oh, and by the way, thank you to whoever pointed this out to me. Evaluating the scale, growth, and origins of right-wing echo chambers on YouTube, by a bunch of people, including David M. Rothschild, and a bunch of places, including the Department of Statistics, Harvard University, and Microsoft Research, New York, and New England. Anyway, I'm not right-wing, I'm not left-wing. Don't you fucking label me. As I always say, left-wing, right-wing, same bird. So this isn't true, but in a way I guess I can wear it as a badge of honor, because I'm on the list. So I'll leave a link if you want to see who else is on the list. Fucking stoned. I got motherfucking spaceship. Oh, fuck. Oh,